Introduction. Robert Cialdini begins with a confession. All his life, he says, he has been a patsy, an easy mark for salespeople, fundraisers, and operators of every kind. He always seemed to end up with magazine subscriptions he never wanted, or tickets to the sanitation workers' ball. That lifelong weakness for a good pitch became his life's work. As an experimental social psychologist, he wanted to answer one question: what makes one person say yes to another? He kept wondering why the very same favor could be refused when it is asked one way and granted when it is asked another. He started in the laboratory with college students. But the lab wasn't enough. To really understand compliance, he realized he had to study the people who practiced it for a living, the salespeople, fundraisers, recruiters, and marketers whose survival depends on getting a yes. So for nearly 3 years he went undercover, answering ads for sales trainees and slipping into advertising and fundraising agencies to learn their methods from the inside, as a spy of sorts. Out of all that immersion came a single clarifying discovery. The thousands of tactics these professionals use almost all fall into just 7 categories, and each one is powered by a single, deep principle of human psychology: reciprocation, liking, social proof, authority, scarcity, commitment, and consistency, and, new to this edition, unity. Each principle works by producing the same effect: an automatic, mindless compliance, a willingness to say yes without stopping to think. And here is the unsettling part. The faster and more crowded modern life becomes, the more we lean on these shortcuts, and the more often that unthinking yes is the one we give. What follows is a tour of the 7 levers, how each one quietly serves us, and how each one can be turned against us. Cialdini even orders the chapters by purpose: reciprocation, liking, and unity for building a relationship; social proof and authority for melting away doubt; consistency and scarcity for spurring us to act. Learn the 7, he promises, and you will never again look at a sales pitch or your own quick yes in quite the same way. Chapter 1. Levers of Influence. Power Tools of the Trades. A mother turkey is a warm and watchful parent, but her care runs on a single trigger. Scientists found that almost everything a hen does for her chicks is set off by one thing: the cheep cheep sound they make. Smell, touch, and appearance barely register. Let a chick cheep and she tends it, but let it fall silent, and she may ignore or even kill her own young. The sound alone flips the switch. The cruelest proof is a demonstration with a stuffed polecat, the turkey's natural enemy. Drag one toward a hen and she attacks in a fury, unless the model hides a small recorder playing cheep cheep, in which case she gathers her mortal enemy underneath her. Turn the recorder off and the attack returns. This is what scientists call a fixed action pattern, a whole sequence of behavior, reliable and rigid, fired by one trigger feature. And it is not just animals. Human beings run shortcuts of exactly the same kind. The world is too complex to analyze everything, so we lean on rules of thumb and react to a single feature of a situation, click, and the tape runs. The psychologist Ellen Langer showed how mechanical this can be. When someone tried to cut in line at a copier with a real reason, "Excuse me, I have 5 pages, may I use the machine because I'm in a rush," 94% of people let her in. With no reason at all, only 60% did. But here is the catch. A meaningless reason worked almost as well. When she added only the empty words "because I have to make some copies," compliance climbed right back to 93%. The word "because," it turned out, was doing the work, not the reason behind it. The trigger, not the logic, did the work. Most of the time these shortcuts serve us well. The trouble is that they can be counterfeited. Cialdini tells of a jewelry store whose turquoise pieces would not sell. The frustrated owner scrawled a note to have the price, but the clerk misread it and doubled it instead, and the whole lot sold out at twice the cost. The buyers, well-off vacationers who knew nothing about turquoise, used one simple rule: expensive equals good. Price became the trigger for quality. The same reflex powers the contrast principle, the way 2 things seen in sequence look more different than they are. Lift something light, then something heavy, and the second feels heavier still. Salespeople exploit it constantly. A clothier sells you the costly suit first, so the sweaters afterward feel cheap. A real estate agent shows you two rundown, overpriced houses first, so the real listing looks wonderful by comparison, and those shabby houses were never meant to sell, only to make the next one shine. None of this is magic. It is leverage, the quiet, automatic levers of influence, and the rest of the book is about how they work and how to keep them from being used against you. Chapter 2. Reciprocation. The old give and take. There is a rule so deep in human life that the anthropologist Richard Leakey called it the very essence of what makes us human. We feel obligated to repay what others give us. A favor demands a favor, a gift, an invitation, an invitation. Every society teaches it, and every society scorns the person who takes and never gives back, the moocher, the ingrate. That sense of debt is so automatic it can be switched on by a stranger, and once it is on, it can push us into a lopsided trade. A psychologist named Dennis Reagan proved it with a simple study. Subjects thought they were rating paintings beside another volunteer named Joe, who was really Reagan's assistant. In one version, Joe stepped out and came back with 2 bottles of Coca-Cola, one for himself and one, unasked, for the subject. Later, Joe asked them to buy some raffle tickets. The people he had bought a Coke for bought twice as many, and it made no difference at all whether they liked Joe. The small gift had silenced the question of liking entirely. This is why the free sample is one of the oldest tricks in selling. The Amway company built an empire leaving its products on your doorstep as a no-obligation trial. The obligation arrives all on its own. The same instinct is hiding in your mailbox. When a charity for disabled veterans mailed out plain donation requests, about 18% of people gave. But when the envelope tucked in a small, unasked gift of address labels, the giving nearly doubled to 35%. There is an even sharper version of the rule, and Cialdini learned it on a sidewalk from a Boy Scout. The boy asked him to buy $5 tickets to the circus. He declined. Then the boy retreated, asking whether he might at least take some $1 chocolate bars instead. Cialdini bought 2, and he doesn't even like chocolate bars. The retreat from a big request to a small one feels like a concession, and a concession demands a concession in return. Researchers named it rejection then retreat, or the door in the face. In one study, students asked to chaperone juvenile delinquents on a day trip to the zoo mostly refused. But when that request was first preceded by an outlandish one, would you counsel those delinquents 2 hours a week for 2 years, and the asker then retreated to the single zoo trip, agreement tripled to 50%. The concession has to look genuine, though. Push the very first demand to something absurd and the whole ploy backfires, because no one believes you ever meant it. The same tactic even helped sink a presidency. The Watergate break-in began as one man's wildly expensive scheme, $1 million for kidnapping squads, a yacht, call girls, and after that was refused, his eventual $250,000 burglary looked almost reasonable by comparison. That leaves the matter of defense. The answer is not to refuse every kindness. That way lies a bitter, isolated life. Cialdini's answer is precise. Accept gifts and favors in good faith, but the moment you feel a gift was really a tactic, a tool to extract your compliance, redefine it for what it is. The rule says favors are to be met with favors. It does not say that tricks must be met with favors. See the gift as a sales device and the debt dissolves. Chapter 3. Liking, the friendly thief. The most successful car salesman in the world had a secret, and it cost him almost nothing. Joe Girard sold more cars, one at a time, than anyone in history, and his method was to send every one of his 13,000 former customers a greeting card every single month. Different cards for the seasons, but always the same 5 printed words. I like you. We are suckers, Cialdini says, for the plain rule that we say yes to people we like. The harder question is what makes us like someone, and the answer is a short list of levers a stranger can pull. The first is good looks. We assume, without noticing we do it, that attractive people are also smart, kind, and honest. a halo effect so strong that, in one Canadian election, handsome candidates drew 2.5 times the votes, while voters flatly denied that looks had swayed them. The second lever is similarity. We like people who resemble us in background, opinions, dress, even names, and we lower our guard for them. The third is praise. We are pushovers for a compliment, even one we half suspect is untrue, which is exactly why Girard's cards worked. The fourth lever is familiarity through cooperation. Things change when we work shoulder to shoulder toward a shared goal. The psychologist Muzaffar Sharif showed it at a boys' summer camp, where two cabins were whipped into mutual hatred by competition, and then thawed back into friendship only when a crisis forced them to pull together. A psychologist named Aronson turned that very lesson into a classroom method he called the jigsaw, handing each child a single piece of the day's material so they had to teach one another to pass the test, and across those rooms prejudice eased and friendships formed over old divides. The fifth lever is association, the simple fact that we like or dislike whatever happens to be linked to something else. The TV weatherman gets hate mail for a forecast he didn't cause, because he stands next to the bad news. Lenders found that a mere credit card logo left in view makes people spend almost a third more freely. And we say we, not they, about the team that won. Compliance professionals assemble these levers on purpose. The Tupperware party is a small masterpiece of it. The real pressure to buy comes not from the demonstrator but from your friend, the host, in whose living room you're sitting and whose profit grows with every bowl. You aren't buying from a company, you're buying from someone you like. The defense is tricky because all these forces work in the dark, and fighting each one is hopeless. So Cialdini says, stop watching the causes and watch the effect. Don't ask whether the salesman is good-looking or charming or somehow similar to you. Ask only one thing: have I come to like this person more and faster than the situation warrants? If the warmth grew unnaturally quick, that is your signal. Step back and pull the person apart from the deal. You can like Dealin' Dan all you want. It's the car, not the salesman, you'll be driving home. It is no accident, one malpractice lawyer observed, that people simply do not sue the doctors they like. Chapter 4. Social Proof. Truths are us. Television comedies still pump fake, can laughter into scenes that aren't funny. And the unsettling thing is that it works. Study after study finds that manufactured laughter makes a real audience laugh longer and rate the jokes as better, even when everyone knows the laughter is manufactured. It taps the deepest of our shortcuts. The principle of social proof, which says we decide what is correct by watching what other people do. If everyone is laughing, it must be funny. If everyone is buying, it must be good. Most of the time this rule is a fine guide. We make fewer mistakes following the crowd than ignoring it. But three forces crank it up, and con artists exploit all three: uncertainty, sheer numbers, and similarity. Uncertainty comes first. When we are unsure, we look hardest at others, and if they seem unsure too, a strange paralysis sets in. The famous illustration is the killing of Kitty Genovese in New York, long reported as a murder that 38 neighbors watched without lifting a finger, though Cialdini takes care to note that later researchers found that account badly overblown. The lasting lesson outlives the myth. When many people meet the same ambiguous emergency, each one scans the others for a clue, and every outwardly calm face becomes proof to the rest that nothing is truly wrong. He calls it pluralistic ignorance. The lab confirms it. A person who collapses is far more likely to be helped by a lone bystander than by a crowd, because in a crowd each onlooker waits for someone else to move first. Numbers magnify the pull. One person pausing to gaze up at the sky barely turns a head, but a small knot of people staring upward can stop the whole street. And similarity sharpens it most of all. We copy people most when they are like us, and that can turn lethal. The researcher David Phillips traced a grim pattern he named the Werther effect. In the 2 months after a suicide makes front-page news, suicides jump by dozens more than usual, and even fatal car and plane crashes spike, as troubled people quietly imitate what they read. The darkest example is Jonestown, where in 1978 more than 900 members of a cult drank poison in a Guyana jungle, each steadying themselves on the calm compliance of the people in line ahead. Social proof can be measured in quieter settings too. At one national park, a sign begging visitors not to steal the petrified wood, and noting how many tons vanish every year, backfired because it quietly told everyone that stealing is common. In a controlled test, that very wording nearly tripled the theft. The lever pushes the other way as well. When households were told most of their neighbors were saving energy, they cut their use more than any appeal to money or the planet could. And the same lever is for sale everywhere. The bartender salts his own tip jar with a few dollars, the nightclub lets a line swell outside a half-empty room, and an advertisement boasts that its product is the fastest-growing brand, each one quietly building the look of a crowd so the rest of us fall in behind it. None of this means we should ignore the crowd. It means we should switch off the autopilot the moment the evidence is plainly rigged or plainly wrong. And if you are ever the one on the ground who needs help, don't scream into the crowd and trust social proof to rescue you. Cut through it. Point to one person and make their job unmistakable. You, in the blue jacket, call an ambulance. You hand a single bystander a clear role, and you turn a frozen crowd into one person who acts. Chapter 5. Authority, Directed Deference. In the early 1960s, volunteers came to a laboratory at Yale University believing they were helping with a study of memory. An experimenter in a gray coat told each of them to deliver electric shocks to another participant, a mild man strapped in the next room, and to raise the voltage with every wrong answer. The man, really an actor who felt nothing, began to protest, then to scream, then to beg, then fell silent as if he had collapsed. Many volunteers trembled and sweated and pleaded to quit. And yet, when the calm voice in the gray coat said the experiment requires that you continue, roughly 2/3 of them obeyed all the way to the final, possibly lethal switch. Stanley Milgram's experiment is the most chilling demonstration in all of psychology, and its lesson is not that those people were monsters. It is that we carry a deep, trained reflex to obey legitimate authority, a reflex that can run on its own long after obedience has stopped making sense. What makes it eerier is how badly we misjudge ourselves. Asked beforehand, a roomful of psychiatrists guessed that barely 1 person in 1,000 would go all the way to the end, yet 2/3 of them did. The same automatic deference shows up in a hospital. In one study, a researcher telephoned nurses, claimed to be a doctor they had never met, and ordered them to give a patient double the maximum dose of a drug. 95% of the nurses set off for the medicine cabinet to do it, caught only at the last moment. They were not reacting to the man. They were reacting to the word doctor. And that is the trap. In click-run mode, Cialdini warns, we obey the symbols of authority as readily as the real thing. 3 symbols do most of the work. Titles. A man introduced to a class as a visiting professor was later remembered as physically taller than when the very same man was called a student. Clothes. 3.5 times as many pedestrians followed a jaywalker into traffic when he wore a business suit instead of casual clothes. And trappings. Drivers will sit patiently behind a stalled luxury car, but lean on the horn at an economy model, deferring to the gleam of status. The con artist knows all of this, and simply wears the uniform without earning the rank. So Cialdini hands us 2 questions to break the spell. The first, is this authority truly an expert? The television actor in the white coat selling cough syrup knows nothing of medicine. The suited stranger knows nothing of crossing the street. Strip away the costume and ask whether real expertise sits underneath. The second, how truthful can we expect this expert to be here? Even a genuine specialist may be steering us for their own gain, so we should ask not only whether they know, but whether, in this moment, they have any reason to tell us straight. Chapter 6. Scarcity, the Rule of the Few. The writer Chesterton once said that the way to love anything is to realize that it might be lost, and compliance professionals have built a science on that single sentence. The principle of scarcity is plain. The less available something becomes, the more we want it and the higher we value it. Part of this is a sensible shortcut, Things that are hard to get are usually better than things anyone can have, and part of it is something fiercer. We hate to lose a freedom. The psychologist Jack Brem called that reaction reactance. Tell people they cannot have something, and they want it far more than before. You can watch it switch on at age 2, the famous terrible twos, and watch it again in love, where parents who try to break up a young couple often only fuse them tighter, the so-called Romeo and Juliet effect. The clearest proof is a jar of cookies. In a study by Stephen Wurtzel, people rated a cookie as more desirable when only 2 were left in the jar than when there were 10, the same cookie, prized more simply because it was scarce. And there was a twist that should make any shopper wary. The cookies people craved most were the ones that had just become scarce because other people were taking them. Newly scarce and scarce through competition, that is the most intoxicating mix of all, and it is exactly what a salesman manufactures when he murmurs that he sold the last one only this morning and isn't sure he can get another. Scarcity even bends what we believe. When students were told a speech would be banned, they came to agree with its argument more without ever hearing it. Forbid a message and you make it more persuasive. Stamp a novel for adults only, and younger readers want it more and expect to enjoy it more, all before they open the cover. The same hunger fuels the limited-time offer, the ticking deadline, the velvet rope, the line out the door. At one phone launch, a woman offered a stranger her $2,800 Louis Vuitton bag to trade places in the queue, terrified the store would run out. Scarcity can even overrule our own senses. When Coca-Cola retired its old recipe in 1985, the very people who had chosen the new formula in blind taste tests suddenly fought to bring the old one back, now that it was the thing they could no longer have. Resisting a pull this primitive is hard, because scarcity works by raising your pulse, not your reason, and a racing heart drowns out clear thought. So Cialdini's method has 2 steps. The instant you feel that jolt of urgency, the must-have-it-now rush, treat the feeling itself as the alarm bell, and stop. Then ask what you actually want the thing for. If you want it to use, to drink, to drive, to wear, remember that a scarce cookie never tasted any better than a plentiful one. The joy of a rare thing is in owning it, not in using it, and if it's the using you care about, scarcity is telling you nothing worth paying extra for. It is no coincidence that revolutions tend to ignite not among the hopeless but among people who tasted improvement and then felt it being snatched away. A freedom is never so precious as when it is about to be lost. Chapter 7. Commitment and Consistency, Hobgoblins of the Mind. Once we have made a choice, we come under a quiet pressure to act in line with it, to prove to others and to ourselves that we are consistent. Consistency is usually a virtue. The person who swerves with every breeze is the one we distrust. But that same drive can be turned into a trap, because once a commitment is in place, the mind begins generating its own reasons to keep it, and those reasons take on a life of their own. The lever that opens this door is tiny. It is called the foot in the door, and the classic study comes from the researchers Friedman and Fraser in California. Homeowners were asked to plant a huge, ugly drive carefully billboard on their front lawns. Almost everyone refused, except in one neighborhood, where 76% said yes. 2 weeks earlier, those residents had agreed to a tiny, harmless favor, showing a 3-inch "Be a Safe Driver" sign in a window. That trivial first yes had quietly changed how they saw themselves, into the kind of people who support such causes, and the giant billboard simply followed. The most disturbing example comes from the prison camps of the Korean War, where Chinese captors drew collaboration out of American prisoners not by torture but by consistency. They began with something trivial: get a man to agree that his country is not perfect, then to write it down, then to read it aloud, then to enter an essay contest, each small and freely made step pulling him toward the next, until men had reasoned themselves partway into the enemy's worldview. The same engine drives the car lot. In the lowball tactic, a salesman offers a price too good to be true, lets you commit, fill out the forms, picture the car in your driveway, and only then discovers an error that raises the price. Most people buy anyway because by then the decision is standing on legs of its own. Cialdini ran the experiment on himself. When he asked students to a study at 7 in the morning, most said no. But when he won their yes first and only then named the brutal hour, almost none withdrew, and nearly all of them actually showed up. Toy companies play the same string each Christmas. They advertise a must-have toy until children ring out a promise, then quietly let the shelves run dry. Parents buy a substitute to keep the peace, and when the ads return in January, the child protests that a promise is a promise, so the parents buy the original too, paying twice to honor one small commitment. What makes a commitment hold fastest is worth knowing, since it is also how to spot the manipulation. Commitments bind hardest when they are active, public, effortful, and above all freely chosen, made with no bribe and no threat, so we feel we own them. That is why the cult and the fraternity both insist you choose your ordeal. An initiation you suffered for, with no one forcing you, becomes something you will defend for years. The harsher the trial, one classic study found, the more fiercely recruits prized a group that had been rigged on purpose to be dull and worthless. So the defense is to notice when consistency is being used as a weapon against your own interest, and Cialdini offers two inner signals. The first is the feeling in your stomach, that sinking sense that you are being maneuvered into something you would rather not do, held there only by the wish to seem consistent. The second is subtler. Ask your heart of hearts. If you could return to the moment before you committed, knowing everything you know now, would you make the same choice? The first answer that flashes up, before the excuses arrive, is the true one. Chapter 8. Unity. The we is the shared me. The best-selling car salesman of all time was Joe Girard, until a quiet rival named Ali Rita, working in Dearborn, Michigan, sold even more, with a principal Girard never named. Rita is Arab American, and he sold to a large Arab American community that saw him not merely as likable, but as one of their own. That is the seventh and newest principle in the book, unity. And it is not the same as liking. Liking says we resemble each other. Unity says we are, in some real sense, the same members of one family, one tribe, one we. When someone belongs to that we, their request carries the weight of an insider's, because in our minds the line between self and other has blurred. Cialdini finds unity built from two great sources. The first is kinship, family, and the feeling of family. We will do for blood relatives what we will do for no one else, and clever persuaders borrow the language of family to reach us. Brotherhood, sisterhood, motherland, heritage, ancestry. When Warren Buffett wanted shareholders to trust his vision for the next 50 years, he wrote that he would tell them exactly what he would tell his own family, and longtime investors melted. The second source is place, the shared home, town, and region that make us feel we belong together. In one of the book's darkest stories, a Nazi guard moving down a line of prisoners, executing every 10th man, reached one, paused, and passed him over, sparing him because he recognized the man as someone from his own hometown. Even at the edge of murder, the bond of shared place held. Place can rouse the best in us, too. During the war, a Japanese diplomat named Chun Sugihara, posted in Lithuania, defied his own government and wrote out visas through the night to save thousands of Polish Jews. Moved, in part, because his father had once kept an inn that took in travelers of every kind, until the whole world had come to feel like home. And there is a second road to unity, not from being together but from acting together. When people move in synchrony, singing, marching, tapping in time, they bond and grow more willing to sacrifice for one another. In one experiment, people who had simply tapped a table in unison with a partner were far more likely, afterward, to stay and help that partner with a tedious chore. About half of them did, against fewer than 1 in 5 who had tapped out of time. German 4-year-olds who had moved together to music became several times more likely to help a peer. Even making something together fuses us. Ask people not for their opinion but for their advice, and the act of co-creating pulls them onto your side. As the novelist Saul Bellow put it, when we ask for advice we are usually looking for an accomplice. It can turn on a single word. People asked to give advice on a proposed new restaurant, rather than their opinion, came away feeling linked to it and more likely to give it their business. The power of unity is also its danger, because the very same instinct can be manufactured and turned dark. The false we of the demagogue, the affinity fraud that preys on a shared faith, the swindler Bernard Madoff fleecing the very community that trusted him as one of their own. Cialdini's caution is sober. Notice when a persuader is working to install themselves inside your we before they make the ask, because once we count someone as one of us, we stop scrutinizing them, and that, in the end, is the whole point. The we, he writes, is the shared me. Chapter 9. Instant Influence, Primitive Consent for an Automatic Age. Cialdini closes the book where he began it, with the mother turkey and her single trigger, and turns it into a warning about ourselves. We long ago outgrew the small-brained creatures that run their whole lives on one cue. And yet, he argues, the modern world is quietly pushing us back toward exactly that kind of automatic single-feature response. The reason is overload. There is simply too much information, too many choices, and too little time. The writer John Stuart Mill, who died around a century and a half ago, is sometimes called the last man who could know everything there was to know, and the flood has only risen since. The informational power of a single phone in your pocket, Cialdini notes, exceeds that of whole universities a generation ago. We feel the flood in our own hands. People now glance at their phones more than 100 times a day, and most admit they could not last a single day without them. Drowning in it, we cope the only way we can, by deciding on one good clue instead of the whole picture, leaning ever harder on reciprocation, authority, social proof, and the rest. That is why these levers grow more powerful every year, and why the book matters more now than when it was first written. But the conclusion is not despair. Cialdini argues that the shortcuts themselves are good. They are necessities, not laziness, and most of the time the single clue really is reliable. The enemy is not the shortcut. The enemy is the person who fakes the clue. The counterfeit testimonial, the invented scarcity, the borrowed uniform, the manufactured we. Those frauds do not just cheat us once. They poison the rules of thumb we all depend on to get through a world too big to think through. And so, where most of the book teaches gentle vigilance, the final page calls for something firmer. He savors the spirit of it in a retort he loved. When the abrasive television host Joe Pine jeered at the young musician Frank Zappa, "I guess your long hair makes you a girl," Zappa fired straight back, "I guess your wooden leg makes you a table." Against the honest persuader who plays by the rules, we have no quarrel. But against the ones who fabricate the trigger to exploit us, Cialdini says we are fully justified in fighting back, refusing them, calling them out, boycotting them, because in defending the integrity of our shortcuts, we are defending our ability to live well in a world too complex to reason through at every turn. Promote those who seek to arm us, he writes, and demote those who seek to harm us.